It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Zdeněk Beran once again. Dr. Beran and his son arrived 2 weeks ago tonight, and they're departing Wednesday. So they've had I think, a wonderful 2+ weeks here. And I can assure you that without Dr. Beran, I don't think there would have been a Czech semester this fall. He was instrumental. We couldn't have done it without him, because when we first proposed the idea, he quickly jumped on board and quickly lined up about a dozen of his colleagues at the University of Hradec Králové to be guest presenters. A few here in person this week, but the rest by teams virtually. And so we have a total of 38 events for the Czech semester, and about a third of them were organized by Dr. Beran, who himself is giving 2 presentations. This is the second one. So we're going to hear about comparing U.S. and Czech culture today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Zdeněk Beran once again.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you will not regret that's my second attempt to tell a little bit about our history and culture, but I promise it will be different than last week. The lecture today will have 2 parts. The first one, something about basic values according to Gerd Hofstede's model. It's about interculturality, and we'll talk a little bit about differences between Czechs and Americans. So maybe it will also be helpful to everyone who will be traveling to the Czechia in December. In the second part, I will show you several important pictures from the US and Czech history, put it together, and look for different parallels, connections, and maybe we will think about if our histories are not that different from each other. Let's start with this strange picture. It's maybe more strange to Central Europeans than to US citizens. If you look here to this map, maybe it can make sense here. It doesn't make sense in our country, of course. The proportions of this school atlas book, you know what I mean. I think we all guess where the pupils and students can learn from such a map. And this is really strange. It's like upside down. Everything is different than we are used to see our world. But maybe this atlas, this map, could be used in Australia. So what I want to say, it's about a point of view, about viewing the world, about different perspectives. If you try to catch the intercultural dimension, you always have to think about different perspectives, and that's what we would like to do today. Yes, and here we are in a model. You don't have to trust the model, never trust any theoretical models. They are only models, they are not reality, but they can help. We can compare emphasis on different values in the USA and Czechia using Gerd Hofstede's model. You can check what he's done at this web page. And it operates with 6 dimensions, which should be briefly introduced. So the first one, and we will go from the left side to the right. Czech Republic is blue, and the United States is, this color, blueberry and cream. So power distance index. This dimension expresses the degree to which the less powerful members of a society accept and expect the power is distributed unequally. The fundamental issue here is how a society handles inequalities among people. People in societies exhibiting a large degree of power distance accept a hierarchical order in which everybody has a place and which needs no further justification. In societies with a lower power distance, people strive to equalize the distribution of power and demand justification for inequalities of power. We can see that this is stronger in the Czech Republic than in the US. And maybe I'm slightly surprised here with a higher score of Czechs, because I'm aware the Czechs are strongly egalitarian with reluctance to respect authorities, that we are. But maybe it is a result of decades of ruling bureaucracy and inability to democratically and freely participate on society's development. Definitely, I think there will be a big difference between generations in the Czech Republic if we compare older and younger generations, and the dimension seems to me to be changing quite quickly. Look at the second graph, individualism versus collectivism. Big difference and high score by the US citizens. The high side of this dimension is called individualism. It could be defined as a preference for a loosely knit social framework in which individuals are expected to take care of themselves and their immediate families. The opposite is collectivism, which represents a preference for a tightly knit framework in society in which individuals can expect their relatives or members of a particular in-group to look after them in exchange for unquestioning loyalty. I think it can make sense. Looking to this graph, I would say Americans are almost as individualistic as possible. An example comes to my mind to illustrate this dimension. Maybe Czech parents take longer care of their children with bigger responsibility of their future lives. We also usually live nearby our original families more often than here in the USA, but I discussed this category with Dr. Schreiber, and she told me that the MSSU students maybe live more European way of considering this category, like having a lot more family ties than average American college and university students. But it's up to you. I'm not sure. Yeah, but still there is a stronger accent on individualism from American culture norms received by the American students here than in the Czech Republic. The third dimension is masculinity versus femininity. There is not a big difference between Czech Republic and America. The masculinity side of this dimension represents a preference in society for achievement, heroism, assertiveness, and material rewards for success. Society at large is more competitive. In opposite, femininity stands for a preference for cooperation, modesty, caring for the weak, and quality of life. Society at large is more consensus-oriented. Maybe a surprise that we are doing very similarly in this dimension. I think Czech society is a little bit more feministic, if we may use this term for this category, than American. It can make sense. Perhaps Czechs who wanted to live their more masculine dreams, they are already living in America, but I only guess. Yeah. I would like to mention that Czechs don't like risking. We are usually careful. We usually always think twice. There is a big difference between our countries comparing our social and healthcare system, because there are in the Czech Republic robust. You won't believe me that we have 4 years of paid parental leave. Our education from kindergarten to university is for free. We have free dentist care, but it's not everything is like it seems to be. Sometimes you must pay some extra money to receive a really high quality of these services. And it's not saying by a scholar, but as a person living in the Czech Republic, I think a big problem among Czech people is envy because of egalitarianism. So Czech people could have a weakness in envy, as well as most people in our country don't want to stray from the norm. The fourth dimension, uncertainty, avoidance, index, a big difference between Czechs and Northern Americans. This dimension expresses the degree to which the members of a society feel uncomfortable with uncertainty and ambiguity. The fundamental issue here is how a society deals with the fact that the future can never be known. Should we try to control the future or just let it happen? Countries exhibiting strong index in this category maintain rigid codes of belief and behavior and are intolerant of unorthodox behavior and ideas. Czechs hate uncertainty. I would confirm. I would compare us to hobbits, maybe. There are several signs of xenophobia in society. It is, which is otherwise fairly tolerant society. So don't be afraid of us, but we have some weak points. The majority of our nation is afraid of migration from Africa and the Middle East. For decades, Czechia was very homogeneous. After expulsion of Germans and tragedy of Jews during and after the Second World War, in our country there is only a huge majority of Czechs and some small minorities of other nationalities or different groups of people. This category, if we put it to the school system, this category is also related to a stronger role of teachers in Czechia, connected with a more passive role of our students. But teaching in the class here, I think our students can also be quite active, but I'm speaking about average. And in Czechia, you can find more positioning our teachers to the role of an unerring authority. The dimension number 5 is long-term orientation versus short-term normative orientation. A huge difference, a huge difference. I would explain it first. Every society has to maintain some links with its own past while dealing with the challenges of the present and the future. Societies prioritize these two existential goals differently. Societies who score low on this dimension prefer to maintain time-honored traditions and norms while viewing societal change with suspicion. Those with a culture with high scores, on the other hand, take a more pragmatic approach. They encourage thrift and efforts in modern education as a way to prepare for the future. Quite a big surprise. Surprising results here. Think about it. I'm really not sure if it makes sense to me if Czechs are more pragmatic in the sense of this dimension and Americans more normative. I think I'm quite surprised here, and maybe you will be able to explain it better than I am. And the sixth dimension, indulgence versus restraint, there we see again a huge difference. Indulgence here stands for a society that allows relatively free gratification of basic and natural human drives related to enjoying life and having fun. Restraint stands for a society that suppresses gratification of needs and regulates it by means of strict social norms. Wow. I'm really surprised that using this model, it looks like strongly socially controlled Czechs, but maybe we are. and Americans focused more on free joy and pleasure. Maybe it can make sense. We can think about it all together. But as I said, this is only a model. Don't trust it. It's only for the first orientation if our intercultural differences. And now we can proceed to the second part of this lecture today. Make yourself comfortable because we are just starting the journey across the whole history. It will be very fast. Here we have your President Biden, and the man on the right is our Prime Minister, our current Czech PM, who is a professor of political science, the first professor of political science of the whole Czech Republic. He's a well-educated man, and yeah, I think we need a strong leader during these times. So they represent a good relation between our nations, of course. And I don't want to discuss all the difficult questions like what is a part of American history? You know more about it than I know. I had to focus on parts of your history like colonization, to connect American history with its European origins, to make it compatible with our Czech history. So sorry that my view of your history will be like a little bit narrow, but yeah, that's what I had to do. The first picture shows us, you know, the statue, Leif Erikson, who recently took the primacy of Christopher Columbus on discovering your new continent. Several decades before his voyage, Bohemia gained its first and the most important national patron, Saint Wenceslas, or Václav. It's a very popular name in Czech Republic, Václav. In fact, Northern and East Central Europe were Christianized in similar era. And what makes our story of Saint Wenceslav special? It's a horrible story. He was an older son of the Duke of Bohemia, but was killed by armed men of his younger brother Boleslaus. After Wenceslaus' death, Duke Boleslaus strove to canonize his brother, together with establishing independent bishopric in Prague. These efforts were successful, and St. Wenceslas has been considered the patron saint of the whole land for centuries. So, we are not sure if the Boleslaus is depicted here, but we can identify St. Wenceslaus, the patron saint. So Boleslaus received ambiguous characteristics: a fratricide and a creator of the state. Picture number 2. Christopher Columbus is heading to India. Yeah, there are some newly made ships, of course, but imagine that. What connected late medieval Spain and Bohemia? Before discovery of American gold and silver mines in Bohemia were one of the most abundant of the whole Europe. Until 1526, the Bohemian lands were under the rule of the Jagiellonian dynasty, which signed contracts on marriage with Habsburgs. Habsburg brothers, Charles V and Ferdinand I, thus concentrated their rule over Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, the Bohemian lands, and Hungary after the Battle of Mohács in 1526, where Jagiellonian king was defeated by Ottoman Turks. After 100 years of domestic reformation, I was talking about it last week, Bohemia as well as Moravia were 90% Protestant. The strategy of the third Habsburg rulers thus respected religious tolerance, but step by step they strove to centralize their power and support Catholicism. Yeah, beautiful Gothic nave in some of our cathedrals. you will see. Beginning of the 17th century is about struggle between religions. Religious minorities from the Western Europe were looking for a shelter in America. And similarly, religious tolerance prevailed in Bohemia. They made part of the domestic reformation from the so-called Unity of the Brethren, or maybe you know this church as the Moravian Brothers. They were based on the belief that faith is a godly gift and therefore no one should be forced to faith. But it was only they believe, the big powers believed in different way. Catholics, Lutherans and Brethren all lived in one country together. But time favored centralism and absolutism. After short legalization of different religious groups in Bohemia by the letter of Emperor Rudolf II, all hopes vanished. This is the decree of Emperor Rudolf II, and you see it is corrupted. So we can say what was the result of this tolerance. Groups of Czech Protestants were defeated by the imperial army, and Emperor Ferdinand II decided on something in Bohemia unheard so far. Believe me, our history is much less bloody than English. There were no many murders and kills among nobility. They were keeping their lives safe. So this was something shocking to whole Bohemian society. Emperor Ferdinand II ordered the execution of 27 leaders of a state government, and heads of executed men were exposed on city gates as a warning and were removed after many years after that as skulls by Saxon Lutheran army in 1630. I think connection with the ship Mayflower is just full of meanings. Yes, and that is the execution of Czech lords and knights and burghers on the old town square. If you will come to Prague, you will see the place where this mass murder took place. But years passed and Czechs in general accepted their new Catholic faith, showed themselves fully loyal to the ruling Habsburg dynasty. The new aristocracy was, however, more German than Czech. In a decade when your country was born and Americans defeated British colonial armies, Bohemia and Moravia lived in peace. Ideas of enlightenment connected our countries. According then, Emperor Joseph II, and man on the right side of our image, he introduced a partial religious tolerance and cancelled forced labor of subject in the last quarter of the 18th century. He also allowed mass mobility from countryside, which encouraged rapid urbanization. The Industrial Revolution came to Eastern Central Europe with the most important raw material, cotton, which also connected our two countries. The saddest conflict in American history, I think the Civil War, had a parallel far away in Central Europe. The growing lust of Prussia, our neighboring state, Central European power, they aimed at weakening the Austrian Empire. In 1866, the less equipped Austrian army was defeated and parts of Bohemia were occupied by Prussians. Recently reborn Czech nation fought faithfully on the side of Austrian Empire, but was greatly disappointed with the result. The ruling emperor, Franz Joseph II, had to pay for this failure, but he chose another nation to be preferred beside Germans in his empire, not Czechs, not Poles, but Hungarians. So the state transformed into the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I think you know this name. And Czechs, together with Slovaks and Poles, had to wait again to find their independence. And we are heading towards the First World War. As it began, many Czech soldiers were called to the army to serve the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And we can admit that many of them went voluntarily because they understood it as a defense of their homeland, as they mainly identified themselves with the empire. One man on the right side, because I'm sure you know the man on the left side, the man on the right side dreamt of an independent, free and democratic Czech state. He was a professor of sociology and a leader of a minor political party. He married an American wife and unusually received her surname. His name was Tomáš Garrigue, after his wife, Masaryk. He advocated the right for an independent Czech state, and thanks to successes of Czech foreign legions, he was able to convince Western politicians to support his idea. According to President Woodrow Wilson's idea of national self-determination, Czechoslovakia was founded in 1918. We may say that it was a slightly artificial solution for Czechs and Slovaks, because Czechs wanted to escape German dominance and Slovaks seeked to escape Hungarian rule. The new state had huge problems, economic, national. Millions of Germans were trapped in this Slavonic state. Political, overall instability in the interwar era, but it persisted, developed, kept democratic ideals of President Masaryk, and remained the last real democracy in the whole Central Europe before the Second World War. The Second World War. During this terrible war, Czech people had to serve Germany again. In the so-called protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, Czech factories were producing weapons and goods for Wehrmacht. Many of the young men joined resistance, or left their homeland and joined foreign military services in Britain or in Soviet Union. An exile government was established in London, and together Polish, Czech and Slovak pilots became very welcomed help for the RAF. But two demons were working against free Czechoslovakia. Czech people were disappointed with the West after the conference in Munich, so they looked more actively for protection from Russia, and they were also disappointed with fascism, so they were looking more openly to tempting ideas of communism. The deciding factor, however, was Joseph Stalin's vision of new geopolitics in Europe. On the left side, you see American armored vehicles liberating Western Bohemian city. They could have proceeded much further in the country, but the Potsdam Agreement clearly divided power spheres. They had to stop and leave the rest of the country, the main part of the country, to the Red Army. So the main part of Czechoslovakia was liberated by the Red Army, and it still has been part of Soviet, or now Russian, propaganda of shed Russian blood in our country, on the Czech land, which in their eyes justifies their right for special respect. And we may translate respect to submission. I think that's how Russians consider this. 1950s, hard years, would be remembered as the decade of Europeans' reconstruction, but at the same time, the worst political processes were held in Czechoslovakia, and the communist fervor killed innocent democratic opponents of the regime, such as Milada Horáková, a famous one, or it also killed high communist officials, as for example Rudolf Slánsky, former RAF heroes were locked away in prisons or uranium mines. The question, I won't answer it, but the question is, how strict were the years of McCarthyism here in the USA? And if we can or can't compare it with our situation. The attempt of more free society in Czechoslovakia was called Prague Spring. It should be put into a broader context with youth protests in the Western countries. However, the voice of our young people, together with reform communists, was silenced by Leonid Brezhnev's tanks. The era of the so-called normalization began. Soviet military bases remained in our country until the early 1990s. And we are very happy that we get rid of them. If you will attend the Havel movie, you know, the first democratic president after communist regime, he wasn't a perfect man. Yes, he really was far from being an angel. I would compare him more to a Beat Generation poet. He also wrote several dramas, a very interesting person, but I wouldn't want to be his wife. Sorry. But in political life, he brought a brand new style of moral responsibility and received full international respect. The Communist Party transformed into a minor party in our parliament and never returned to power again. Currently, they have, I don't know, 3 or 4% of all votes in the country. That's good. Sorry, I'm being a little bit political. During the 1990s, we were quickly developing our ties with the West because we really wanted to be a part of it. We became NATO members in 1999, and in 2004, we entered the European Union. And there is one person. We love her much, and I hope she's also very popular here in the USA, Madeleine Albright. Many things happened thanks to her. She was born in Prague, and for those of you who are younger, I still remember her from our television, but she was US Secretary during 1997 to 2001. She was born in Prague, and she left Czechoslovakia after the communist coup in 1948. The picture on the right depicts crowds on the Wenceslas Square, the biggest and the main square in Prague, during the so-called Velvet Revolution in 1989. The Velvet Revolution led to the power transfer from communists to the new democratically elected political elite. No one was killed. However, some voices claim that many former communists profited from the situation and started their successful careers in our society with sometimes literally no limits in 1990s. It's different now than in the 1990s. Wild 1990s began. The story of privatization of state property, mass crime is a bad story, but we hope it's a closed chapter now. Today, Czechia is one of the safest countries in the world with good standard of living. Ukraine crisis helped many of my fellows who admired or secretly admired Russia to see the truth about Russia, which revived our relations with Western countries and especially with the USA. We can't forget big Czech diaspora in this country, counting around 1.5 million men and women of Czech nationality living here in the USA. And some of the last remarks, because maybe some of you don't like history too much, maybe you prefer sports. And I have a question for golfers. Who do you think are your top female golf players, Sister Korda? The right answer They are daughters of Czech former tennis player Petr Korda. He used to be number 2, the world number 2, and his Czech wife. So they are completely Czech, but now Americans. There are still many top tennis female players from our country. Maybe it's a challenge for my son to be the top male tennis player, because now our females are much better than males, but it can change, I hope. Maybe you know Petra Kvitová, sister Plíšková, or some other names. Or ice hockey fans. There are many Czechs playing NHL. And sorry for beating you this year at the World Championship. But the real legends, maybe you remember them. Dominik Hašek, goalkeeper, he's Czech. Or Jaromír Jágr, number 68. They are no longer active, but still they are better than average members of Czech national team, because our quality a little bit declined from 2000. And another interesting person, do you know the name Ester Ledecká? Because she spends more time here in the US, and she is a special girl. She's Czech, a daughter of popular Czech singer. And for those who still don't know who I'm talking about, she is the girl who won the Olympic gold medal from both alpine skiing and skateboarding. I don't know how she did that, but yeah, she's Czech, but she is doing the sport here and competitions here in the USA. I hope there are more interesting persons, moments from our history, culture, and society. And I hope you will be nicely surprised with other Czech times, other things related to our country. We will warmly welcome you to Czechia in December. And I wish you a pleasant day. And our group is heading to Amish community. So thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you will find more interesting moments from our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beran. We have a few minutes left for questions. Does anyone have one? Dr. Van Galen.
Thank you for a wonderful and informative presentation. My question revolves around religion, both in the United States and in Czechia. Religion has obviously played an important role in shaping that history. I wonder if you can comment on the role of religion today in Czechia, and perhaps even how that might shape some of the dimensions of Hofstede's cultural dimensions.
Oh, thank you very much for your question. This is a hard one, because the historians and social scientists have different opinions on the role of our Reformation. We call that Hussite Revolution because of the name of reformist John Huss. Some would say that our country is considered to be one of the most atheistic countries in the world nowadays. Some would say that it's because of Jan Hus, because he stole Czech nation from the Roman Catholic Church. The other will say, no, it's maybe more the fault of Habsburgs, because they forced Protestant Czech nation to believe in a Catholic way. So there is no common sense on this question. And connecting it to Hofstede's model, I think it's a really, really hard question. Maybe better will be able to answer sociologists, but there were more important factors during our history, because the religious tolerance went hand in hand with a special type of state, a special social system, which was called a states monarchy. It was something special for East Central Europe. And we didn't have such a strong absolutistic central power as, for example, France or Britain. And it was possible for the landlords to say, I will protect my brethren, I will protect another religious minority. So I personally, but I can speak on behalf of other Czech historians, would say it was nice. It was a big level of freedom. But other scholars will say, yes, it was nice, but it was an unsuccessful model, because those who were successful were absolutistic monarchies of the West. So it's really a hard question. I think it would need one whole special lecture. And then I think our identity was formed with these memories of like failure, of being a suppressed nation, a nation which lost its religion. So somehow, I think it's true, somehow it is connected to those categories from Hofstede's model. Thank you.
Other questions? I'll ask one. You've been here now 2 weeks, and you also previously visited the United States. What is your biggest surprise or takeaway, the differences between the two countries?
Yeah, thank you. This is a very easy question for me, because I realized it, I think, in 2 days after coming here. The feeling was like we are very similar, but we do everything in different way. There are differences in small things, and we do everything, eating, or all the stuff around is different. But in general, as a person, as a society, there is no big difference. I think we are part of the one cultural world or one cultural era. area. But we do everything differerently. We taste differently. We don't put salt into sweet things as you do, and we don't put sugar in salty things as you do in salty meals. But it's a minor thing. But everywhere I observe these differences and similarities.
As you know, I come from a Czech heritage.
You are Czech, I know.
Yes.
You are my brother.
And the one characteristic, I think, if you compared Americans to the Czechs, is if you ask me what is the one thing they're most similar in, defiance. If you push a Czech far enough, keep poking him, he becomes incredibly defiant. You know, like Hussites. You know, I think of our Alamo, and then I think about when they killed Heydrich. You know, both of them said, you know, drop dead, let's fight. You know, the Czech Legion, you know, the idea of having an army marching through another country.
Yeah, but
so I see that. And by the way, when you showed the picture of the Civil War, in the city of Chicago, they have a huge memorial to Czech soldiers who fought for the Union during the Civil War.
Mm-hmm. Maybe more Czechs fighting on the sides of Unionists than on Confederates.
Yeah, well,
guess.
it had to do with where they immigrated to.
Yeah.
But in fact, they played a huge role in the Battle of Vicksburg.
But thank you, thank you. But still,
anyway, that would be the one thing, is defiance.
But if you remember the film, The Elementary School, I think that was very true, showing the scene. Someone told that Czechs should have fought against Nazis in 1940s. And the father of the main boy character, he said, yes, but there will be half of us now. And maybe that's the feeling of Czech nation, like a small nation, or small. We have 10 million of inhabitants and many more millions in America and in other countries. But still there is Germany, Russia, and Poland is 4 times bigger than Czech Republic. Yeah, so maybe there is a feeling of a small nation, and many Czechs will say, like, we have to keep our eyes on ourselves, our us hobbits, yeah, we make better our homes, our weekend houses, and so on. And maybe sometimes we are lacking courage, because Poles now, if you watch the news, they say we shall fight Putin. We will do it. We are not afraid of him. But Czechs will say, oh, but Russians, they have those nukes, and what we are able to do, we are a small nation. Yeah. But maybe there are moments in our history when Czechs say it doesn't matter that we are a smaller nation and we have to fight on the values which are important.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you for coming today, and thank you, Dr. Beran, for a fantastic presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you.